In 1993, what was supposed to be a summer ball game turned into a 5-hour street fight. More than 10,000 people showed up at a Toronto park. Nazi-inspired youth showed up with a swastika flag and started attacking Jewish people and bystanders. Young Jewish people, union leaders, and other marginalized communities fought back. And the result was a riot.
And as soon as they said, clobber those Jews, we tapped them on the shoulder and said, you don't like the Jews. So when they turned around, boom, we hit them and down they toppled because it was a steep hill. And down they toppled, and that's when the fight started.
Fists flew, heads split open, and the Toronto Daily Star at the time called it, quote, one of the worst free-for-alls ever seen in the city, end quote. That riot took place in Christie Pitts, a park just north of Little Italy in Toronto. And now, 92 years later, Christie Pitts is back in the headlines.
Sick and tired of the mass immigration. See, like, I'm okay with immigration. It's this mass immigration where they bring everybody in this shit. Why? Man, we care about us, bro. Worry about us first.
At that same park, a group called Canada First organized a protest.
This is our nation! Start deportations!
This is our nation! Start deportations!
This is our nation! Once again, Canada First. We're here. We're still here. You can try to snatch my flag, but you'll never take it out of my goddamn hands. This is our country. This is our nation. This is our streets.
Let's go.
Let's go, boys.
This is our street, baby.
This is our streets, baby.
Let's go.
We're here, and we're not going nowhere. Let's go.
Seeing coverage of that protest over the weekend was scary. It was violent, but nothing like that 1933 protest. Only about 100 people showed up, and counter-protesters actually ended up outnumbering the original demonstrators. But what it told me was that the conversation about immigration in this country had reached a boiling point. Talking about immigration in Canada has gotten really hard. As soon as you say you don't want someone or a group of people in your country, it gets weird, fast. It's emotional and complicated. It's about identity, resources, belonging, and fairness all at once. But the conversation about immigration hasn't just gotten hard. At times, it's gotten vile, racist, xenophobic. I can't count how many times over the last couple of months I've seen the word invasion. Policy proposals aren't happening in a vacuum. But ignoring those tensions doesn't make it go away. I think it just makes it worse. We reached out to Liberal Immigration Minister Lina Diab to come talk about it with me, about immigration. But her team said no. Conservative immigration critic Michelle Rempel Garner said yes. And she's who you'll hear from today. She recently released a proposal to scrap the temporary foreign worker program. And since that announcement, I've been wanting to talk to her. But here's where I need to be up front. This isn't just policy talk for me. I've shared before that I'm an immigrant. I'm on the long and frustrating path to citizenship. So when I scrolled through Michelle Rempel Garner's Substack pieces, watched her interviews, I wasn't just thinking about the system. I was thinking about myself, what her proposed policies would mean for me. This conversation is personal, maybe too personal, and you'll hear that because it got testy at times. It's sad, honestly, and disappointing to kind of hear you say, like, you're not my problem, you know?
I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that. And I will not accept the fact that I said that.
Am I the wrong person to do this interview because it is so personal? Or am I the right person? Because I follow this file so closely, and I know that it's not just about percentages and statistics. It's about real people's lives. I don't know. That's why we have editors, and my editor said that he wanted to hear what a conversation like this would sound like. And when he finally heard the interview, he said it didn't sound like any other interview on this topic that he had ever heard before. The Liberals have already slashed their immigration numbers and massively overhauled their programs, but Michelle Rempel Garner thinks they haven't gone far enough. So, how far would she go? Let's get into it. Hey, MP Michelle Rempel Garner, thank you for making the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We don't often get to hear from conservatives directly, and I think there is this almost underlying assumption of what the conservative position or take on immigration is, that it's anti-immigrant. So I want you to kind of set the record straight here for us.
Well, I refute the premise of it, that argument. And frankly, I think it's the Liberals. They go to that ad hominem place, which I think is so dangerous because they don't want to do the work of fixing the system. And this is how I'll frame it. So I've been asked a couple of times this week about some really concerning polling data that a couple of outlets have done that show that I think it's close to 3/4 of Canadians want to see, major reductions in immigration. They think the immigration system is broken. I don't actually think the debate in Canada and immigration is the same as it is in the US or the UK. When I look at the coverage of immigration debate in those two countries, there are a lot of anti-immigrant sentiments that are baked into the commentary. I think that Canadians across political stripe want to continue to support a fair and orderly immigration system. And I don't think Canadians writ large are anti-immigrant. And when the Liberals accuse Conservatives of being anti-immigrant, they're actually accusing of voters who want to see an orderly immigration system of being anti-immigrant. And I think that is just so bunk and so dangerous. So I'm very sensitive to ensuring that the rhetoric doesn't get pointed at people who come to Canada who want to build a better life for themselves and build our country in a stronger way. I will be pointing my finger at the Liberals for breaking that consensus by screwing up the process.
Let's talk about the Liberal immigration plan. The Liberals finally dropped their immigration numbers, and we saw that there were drastic decreases across the board. Earlier this year, we saw that Canada's saw like a near zero population growth in like the first quarter, according to StatsCan. So are you saying you want to go further than what's already been done?
Well, I think I want to work from first principles. So what
do you mean by that?
What is the purpose of the immigration system? How do we set levels? And if you take it up to the highest level, right? We have a duty, if we're going to invite people to Canada, we have a duty to ensure that the supports are in place to successfully integrate people into our social and economic fabric. So first principle, hundreds of millions of people want to come to Canada. Okay, they do. How do you choose who gets to come, and how do you choose who gets to come when? That's the fundamentals of immigration planning in the country, right? And I think the Liberals, what they've tried to do in the last decade is say that conversation doesn't exist. And it does. I want a system that works for newcomers and a system that works for Canadians. And there's no reason why we can't have that back. And those are that's the principles that I'm working on.
I'm still curious. So if what we're doing right now isn't enough, what is enough? You said who, from where, and how many. So I don't know, maybe give me what would you do if you were in power right now? Or what would you propose the Liberals do?
We're not setting levels at a point where we don't have housing for people, that the economy isn't creating enough jobs for people that are coming into the country, where you see a youth jobs crisis. I'm not blaming newcomers, but the economy isn't creating enough jobs for people, right? So the immigration levels have to match. And then also there's other social supports like healthcare that I don't think are factored into the immigration levels plan adequately enough. So let's start there. Then you start looking at all the different programs, the temporary foreign worker program. I think that there's beyond the structure of the problem, the program has a moral issue for me, because I think it perverts the original system, like spirit of the immigration system in Canada, because it tells people that they can only come to Canada to be an indentured laborer, essentially, right? So I think that needs to go. And then the asylum system is deeply broken too, right? I mean, I am fully supportive. I've advocated for different groups of refugees to come to the country, very persecuted people. But the asylum system, we have like a 300,000 case backlog of people who have claimed asylum in Canada that are here. Many of them will not have valid asylum claims. And it's kind of become this backdoor economic immigration stream. And there's a question of fairness there too, right?
How would you put a cap on international students? Would you pause bringing in people for a year? Like what are we thinking when we say this?
So I did,
because I know I've listened to your podcast and you've hinted at big changes coming, and we should prep. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about what you've got lined up. What are you thinking?
I spent the summer writing a lot of policy with a lot of talented people who have that core of making sure that the finger is not pointed at newcomers, and that it's about structural and programmatic change. Like that's where we're heading. I do have other stuff in the can, but I'm waiting to announce it because I want to see what the Liberals want to do.
Just to be clear, no response on what you're planning on doing. You're not telling me anything.
I just we do have a cadence to communications, right? And I've written about, I've given some pretty strong hints about where we're going to go, but no, I'll be announcing stuff over the next couple of weeks, but there is a lot of stuff in the can. I'll tell you that.
Let's talk a little bit about me then. You and your party have said this is the time for Canadian jobs, for Canadian workers. Technically, I am taking a job from a Canadian who would love to have this position. Journalism jobs are tight these days. I'm sure you know that. I host a very popular Canadian politics show. If the underlying assumption is it's time for Canadian jobs, it's time for Canadian workers, that they should be the priority, do you think I should be here and that I'm taking away jobs from Canadians?
Can I ask you, you don't have to answer this. Are you here on like a permanent residence stream, or are you here on a foreign student? I'm
here as an international student. I came as an international student when the Liberals promised that there was some pathway for students to come here.
There you go.
And become permanent residents.
There you go.
And now I'm on a work permit, a postgraduate work permit, which falls under the International Mobility Program. So when I hear conservatives like yourself talk about drastic changes coming, big changes coming to the International Student Program, possibly to the International Mobility Program, my heart does skip a beat a little bit there. So
I think you were lied to.
Yeah.
I know you were lied to. And I've talked about this on other podcasts. The Liberals did give a wink and a nod to you, come here on a temporary visa, but we're going to find a way. Then they invited 750,000 people in 2 years when we, didn't have, the economy isn't creating those jobs, right? You're clearly
what would your government do? Would you keep us here?
I'll ask you, before I answer, what would you say to somebody who is looking for a journalism job right now, who's put out 50 resumes, who has Canadian citizenship, or is here on a PR, and is saying, well, why do you have my job and I don't? What would you say to them?
Because I deserve this job. I worked hard for this job. I have a resume to, I fulfill the obligations and needs and roles.
You didn't apply on a permanent residency track. So, and again, it goes back to that. Well, this is what I'm saying. I'm glad you asked this, because this is where the rubber hits the road on this conversation, right? It's how many people, we can't take in hundreds of millions of people in this country. We can't, right? And that's why we have permanent residency streams, like economic streams where people apply and they on a permanent residence, like the intent is to stay in Canada,
Yep.
right? Here's the thing. I think you were lied to by the Liberal government. And that breaks my heart because you're clearly talented. You've clearly got a voice and a heart for this country. But why didn't the government tell you to apply through a permanent residency stream? And why are you sitting here, having a conversation with a Canadian legislator about whether you should stay? Because they lied to you.
But I'm curious about you.
But Noor, I'm also accountable to my constituents who are Canadian citizens, right? And I have to put them first, right? And by putting them first, listen, by putting them first, it says, look, of course our country wants to attract and retain people like you. You're smart. And when I say people like you, smart, bright, intelligent, inquisitive, challenging, bold. That's what gets through the stagnation that, prevents economic growth, that encourages the renewal of our pluralism. But it has to be done through smart planning that is through permanent residency streams, not through foreign student visas where the government, hashtag welcome to Canada lies to you. That's not right. So I don't accept the present. And here's what I will promise you. You ask, what would I do? I'll literally say they lied to Noor on Canada land. Okay. And it's up to them to say okay, we now have this crisis where they have juiced the numbers so high that 3/4 of the country think that immigration is bad. Okay. Those numbers have to come under control. But I'm not going to do the typical politician thing to you and say that when I say Canadians, should have the first crack at Canadian jobs, that's my job, right? But I can also say to you as somebody that Canada, who we should be wanting to retain and attract, the government shouldn't have lied to you. And there should be pathways to permanent residencies that are within levels that the country's job creating capacity, healthcare capacity, and housing capacity can support. And that's not, the Liberals aren't going to say that to you. They're going to lie to you again. But I think we need some honesty in this conversation. I'm trying to give that to you now.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the compliments. I think what I'm just I want to make sure I'm super clear here and I'm understanding you and interpreting you correctly. It's just what is it that you want? Because I've had the Liberals for 9 years tell me what they want.
If you were me, what do I say to my constituents at that point? Where when 1 in 5 Canadian students, never mind permanent, on student visas, people who are here on student visas can't find jobs either. There has to be some restoration of order, right? The fact that you and I are having this conversation now, I think it shows how broken the system is, right? We shouldn't be having this conversation. That's not how it was. And so I'm not going to shy away from having that conversation. And I think that's what the Liberals want us to do. But I will say this, this is really refreshing. I think we're getting to the heart of the matter in a civil way. And I think it shows how much this failure, both impacts Canadians, but also people who want to come to the country and stay and contribute. So thank you, I guess.
You've talked a lot about this the concept of integration and the loss of Canadian identity these days. In a recent piece, you said, many in Canada would now describe Canada as a ghettoized cacophony. That's quite an image you're painting here. What are you seeing that you don't like?
I don't like that we've lost common language. Not all the time. And I don't want to sound hyperbolic, but back in 2017, the Liberals changed the language acquisition ages to obtain Canadian citizenship. So they narrowed the range in which you had to be fluent in one of Canada's official languages in order to get Canadian citizenship by quite a bit. And when you think about really high level determinants to social inclusion, language acquisition is one of those things. And instead of saying, how does Canada support newcomers in gaining proficiency in one of Canada's official languages, as a unifier, the government just said, well, let's diminish that as a value or as a necessity or as part of Canadian citizenship. And I think that harkens back to, the Liberals' ethos of the last 10 years of putting post-nationalism ahead of multiculturalism.
I just want to be clear, people still have to learn English before they come here. I actually had taken 3 English proficiency tests before I came here. I'm talking to you. I think I speak pretty well. Yeah.
You're not saying and and like I am. So
yeah, but I don't know. When you say the words ghettoized cacophony, I feel like I have almost like a visceral reaction.
You took the quote out of context, right? Did you want to read the full quote?
Yeah, we can read the full quote.
Sure.
Many in Canada would now describe our nation less as a melodically pluralistic counterpoint and more as a ghettoized cacophony.
Other people would say that, right? It goes to that polling, right?
Okay.
And I think that there's a perception, there's a perception like, okay, well, why are we allowing, at certain levels of government, certain tests to be done in languages that aren't our official language? Why do we have lower language proficiency standards for certain streams of immigration? I think it's fair to ask those questions, particularly in parts of the country where language rights are really important. I'm not saying it's not important in the entire country, but it's like core to the debate in a lot of legislative issues in Quebec. And I think if we're normalizing that we can't talk about language, then
no.
Come here too, right?
100%. 100%. And I think we're having this conversation right now, and I think it's indicative that conversations like this can happen. But as you were saying, this isn't you saying this. You're saying many people in Canada would now describe. How would you describe Canada then? If you don't feel like this is reflective of you, do you think it's a ghettoized cacophony?
The quote that you took there, right? It followed a description of me taking my kids to the National Gallery in Ottawa right before the federal election. Because there's, when you run for office, it's not just you, it's your family. And your family has to be on board. And they have to have a why, right? And there's this installation in the National Gallery. It's beautiful. If anybody gets a chance to see it, it's really, it's something. And it's the Motet in 40 parts. It's a beautiful piece, a beautiful piece of choral work. And it's this speaker system that surrounds you. And it's all these disparate voices. But when you sit in the middle of it, it's perfect. It's harmonious. But it's counterpoint at the same time, right? It's not like everybody's saying the same thing or it's all the same melody. It's like the different voices together come together in something that sounds unified. And it's better because there's more voices. I took my kids to that installation because I wanted them to understand what I saw Canada as and what I was fighting for. And I also said to them, I said, I don't think we're there right now. And I think that we're not there right now because we've gone through a period in the last 10 years where we've had a lot of economic downturn. Like people don't want to talk about this sometimes on the left, but like the reality is our per capita GDP has declined. The wage growth of the lowest 20% of workers in this country has actually dropped as of this year in the first quarter. I think a lot of young Canadians have given up on owning a home or starting a family. We have a lot more crime in our communities. And those are the sort of factors that if they're not looked at, if they're not taken care of, that's what tips those speakers in that room over. And to me, when I say that like people are seeing that those voices become disparate and disconnected and not working together, I think that's a fair observation, but it's the role of legislators to not say, oh, there isn't a problem, which is what we've heard from the Liberals from the last 10 years. It's up to us to come up with debatable solutions to policy. Some people will like what I'm saying and some people won't. But the goal on where we're driving is to protect Canada's pluralism, right? To protect those democratic institutions. And I just reject anybody. Like, again, I've seen some commentators in the last few days really wrote an ad hominem attacks out against public policy debate to restore that order, that counterpoint, harmony. And I reject those because I know what I'm driving to, and I know what I promised my kids. I know what I promised them when I said I would run again. And it was the harmony that I heard in that room. And that's where we're driving to. And that's what I see Canada as.
You have likened and noted numerous times that the United Nations has essentially stated that our temporary foreign worker program is a breeding ground for slavery, a form of slavery. You want to scrap the whole thing and then make some sort of separate standalone program for legitimately hard to fill agricultural jobs. But the agricultural program right now is probably, arguably, the most problematic one in terms of labor conditions and abuse. You know, the UN report came out a year after a group of Jamaican farm workers sent a letter to the minister in 2022 calling what was happening on these farms systematic slavery. If you're going to scrap the whole program, but bring back a version of just this agricultural piece, how do you make sure that those conditions won't continue? Like, what would you do differently?
I've been waiting for somebody to ask me this. So I promise you I'll get to that, but I'm just going to start by saying that the entire system is rife with abuse, because for the most part, when people come to Canada through it, much like you, there's no pathway to permanent residency. I actually,
correct.
And to me, I want to be very clear. I think that the levels of immigration right now in Canada are too high. So I just want to preface it with that. But like when somebody comes to Canada under this program right now, they're essentially, for the most part, tied to one employer, right? So
yes.
when you think about it doesn't matter, ag, somewhere else. So if you're tied to one employer and your ability to stay in the country is keeping that job, like there's no incentive for employers to make better working conditions for their workers. It's very difficult for employees to report abuse, and sometimes the fraud and the abuse is front-ended. Like there have been a lot of stories about how people have been charged exorbitant rates basically to buy one of these work permits, which is illegal. So I say all of that because you talk about the ag stream. When I say there needs to be a separate ag stream, you know, that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be like the Liberals have their enforcement and their protections. Like there's no enforcement. That's a bit hyperbolic, but clearly the enforcement mechanisms to ensure worker rights, all of the abuses talked about in the UN report, like they're not adequate. At the same time, it's like, okay, this is why the temporary foreign worker program was originally put forward. It was to say, like, look, there are people who their career is to go to 3 or 4 different countries and pick grapes, depending on when the harvest is at, or pick peaches or whatnot, right? In remote rural areas. I think that there needs to be a conversation about what that looks like, which is why we're talking about having a separate stream. And frankly, it's not just me saying this. It is the agricultural community. There's a lot of people who there are a lot of good actors in the agricultural community who are like, look, we want a separate stream that's not lumped in with, Tim Hortons, using it as a portion of their labor component. And they want it separate so that it's like, okay, well, we want to have better enforcement mechanisms so that the bad actors of the system are actually held to account. But the Liberals haven't had that conversation. So this is where we're driving to with it. It's not just like Noor, you asked me, well, why haven't you put everything out in one day? It's because the media only has a certain attention span, and so does the public. But these are the public policy issues. This is the granular level that I want to get at parliamentary committee in the House of Commons. And I've been trying to lure the immigration minister out into a press conference all summer, and she hasn't been there. But these are sort of the sorts of questions that I want them to start grappling with, which is the UN report outlines serious abuses that every Canadian should be concerned about. So if there are legitimate labor needs in ultra low areas of ultra low employment with a need for seasonal agricultural work, how do we meet that need without letting it turn into like the Tim Hortons program, right?
Yeah. So, you keep saying you're working the midnight oil, you're working into the late hours into the night, you're talking to all these people. So what would you do different?
Well, I started rolling that. I want to abolish the program. It shouldn't exist.
But with the agricultural stream, what would you do differently?
I've given you some outlines there, right? So on where we want to roll with it.
Okay. Just because, I know what the Liberals have done. I've watched them do it for the past 9 years. I'm just like having a hard time envisioning what a future program like this would look like.
Well, first principle,
without
no worker abuse, good enforcement.
But that's like easy to say, like, don't abuse your workers. I don't know.
How would you do it? Do you agree that that's a first principle, right? That we should be managing to, which is no abuse?
Of course.
Right? Okay. So
of
then
course,
the how comes after the why. And like, I agree with, like, again, there's so many things that the left and the right will disagree with in Canada, but like good working conditions for workers, I think is fairly palatable to most people.
I want to come back to something we were talking about kind of at the beginning of our conversation, which is just like how fraught the conversation around immigration has gotten in this country. I find that in some instances, it's not only just gotten difficult to talk about immigration. Sometimes it's a little scary and vile. I kind of want to read you just a few comments that I've seen. And it didn't take me long to find this stuff. I've seen it everywhere. I'm sure you've seen it. I'll read it out to you. Quote, "We cannot allow Indian invaders to continue destroying the great nation of Canada." End quote. Here's another one. "Canada imported more Indians last year than it has in the last 100 years. Canada is now 15% Indian. Rise up, white man, or it's over." End quote.
So whose fault is that?
Wait, I promise I'll ask you a question at the end of this.
No,
I'm not blaming you for these comments.
No.
I'm not blaming
you. I've seen it. It comes up under, it came up under my tweets when I was advocating for Yazidi genocide victims 10 years ago, right? But like honestly, like whose fault is that? Like, because here's the thing, like if this is a lead up to, okay, well, you're talking about reforming the immigration system so it's fair and orderly, and so that we maintain the principles of Canada's pluralism. I reject that. I can't have that conversation because I think it's the Liberals' fault. It's like the immigration functions in this country when the economy is creating enough jobs to sustain immigration levels. Immigration functions in this country when the levels are set in such a way that social infrastructure, like language training, like ER capacity, like family doctors, match that level. And same with housing. And when you look at where the irritants are in the country, it's a scarcity mindset, right? With people saying like, okay, well, I can't find a job, and objectively they can't. So why is the government allowing people on a temporary basis to take this job? And that's a fair question. It should not translate into blaming of newcomers. And so to people who are writing those tweets, and honestly, like sometimes they're bots and, state actors and whatever, I would just say, regardless of political stripe, look at the government and demand better. And that's all I'm doing. I think that's the responsible path. And if there's going to be a finger pointed at anybody in this country, any legislator, it should be the Liberal government who has just laughed off messing up the immigration system to a point where that type of discourse has become normative. Or like you're reading these tweets, these very dangerous and like tweets online. You know what's equally as dangerous? A lobby group coming into my office and saying we need more indentured labor. That's it. Or a commentator on CBC going, well, I talked to my friends and they don't want to do those jobs. Can you imagine if I said that? What do you mean? What do you mean those people do those jobs? What are we talking about here? That doesn't sound very Canadian. So, my job is to like restore order for the sake of Canada's pluralism. And like, I fundamentally reject the framing. And it's not me saying this. You've got Mark Miller, when he was immigration minister, he said, we didn't turn the taps off quick enough. That's a headline news, right? They admitted they did this. So, and then this week he's out saying like, oh, well, it's an anti-immigrant sentiment. Well, guess what, Mark? You're anti-immigrant because you and your government didn't structure the program properly. You made it harder for people to come to this country and to succeed by screwing up the economy to a point where it's not creating jobs. People are living under bridges, and like, let's just restore order. It's doable. It's solvable, and we can, restore we can keep our pluralism. That's the bus we're driving to, or the end destination the bus is driving to.
I appreciate.
That was a cathartic rant.
I was going to say, I appreciate the rant. Not what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you whose fault it is, but I do want to ask you this, and this will be my final question. Earlier in our conversation, you said your responsibility, your concerns are for your constituents, for Canadians. But I'm here. I'm sure hundreds, if maybe thousands of immigrants may hear this conversation with you and say, what about me? What do you say to immigrants who are feeling the brunt of this discourse, who are hearing, it's sad, honestly, and disappointing to kind of hear you say, like, you're not my problem,
I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that. And I will not accept the fact that I said that. I said the opposite, Noor. I said that the Liberals' broken immigration system has failed both newcomers and Canadians. And like, frankly, I didn't say that. And you know what? You making that insinuation makes the conversation worse. So I have to reject that 100%.
So what do you say to immigrants who are feeling the brunt of this discourse, who are feeling worried when they are listening to conversations?
It keeps me up at night on the question of Canada for why the Liberals lied to you. It keeps me up at night. Like, the Liberals lied to millions of people, both like to people who came to Canada on temporary visas, who they insinuated would be allowed to stay through a temporary residence. They lied. They also lied to people who they hashtag welcome to Canada, who entered Canada through illegal border crossings in upstate New York. Hashtag welcome to Canada, right? They're sitting in queues for four years to get asylum claims heard, and their asylum claims probably aren't valid. Lies, right? So you know what? Like, let's point the finger at the liars and fix the system so that we can get back to order and say, it keeps me up at night. Of course it does. And you know what else? It completely, it makes me beyond enraged that instead of, like, for 10 years, I served in this role for 5 years prior. And I said all of these things 10 years ago. And you know what? They've had to implement everything I said after they insinuated that I, like, all of the names in the book, but I was right. And I was right from the perspective of, like, if we want to keep the ethos of Canada, that pluralism, then, like, you have to have a system that works. And when the Liberals lie to people, and then try to dance around it by, using ad hominem attacks, that actually, who that hurts the most? It hurts immigrants. So I won't accept that framing, and I'm not going to back off on talking about this. The other side of the coin, though, is that they have to figure out that the economy is a problem right now, right? A lot of this goes away if the economy is creating jobs, and it's not looking good. So, those are two, and I would just say this, like a promise to newcomers. We're not looking at you. Newcomers have been the lifeblood of our country for a long period of time. We are looking at the government, though. So the weight of responsibility, I feel keenly, trust me. And I know that there's a narrow path, but I see the light. I think this is eminently solvable, and I believe in the spirit of our country to get this right, too. So I would just say this, like, I think it's fixable, and my job is to push the government to fix it. So let's row in the same direction.
I'm glad you said you're not going to stop talking about it again. I just feel like this conversation, even this one at moments gets intense, but I think it's important to be able to have these conversations and to engage in discourse. I think for a long time, we've tried to close our eyes and look the other way when it comes to immigration in this country. So I appreciate you taking the time with me today.
And I'm sorry the Liberals lied to you, boss. Not great. Not great. I'm going to remember you a lot this fall, I think. So thanks for sharing that.
I appreciate that. I hope you like this video. I know we don't usually see each other this closely. I'm never really this close to you, the camera, the listener. But that's because this conversation was a different kind of conversation than we've had on the show before. I'm not in my typical newscaster type desk because I was not in this was not a neutral conversation. I laid out my biases at the top of this episode, and I wanted it to be very clear that this is a different kind of episode, that it's a lot more personal, a lot more intimate. So that's why we're so close. I don't know if you'll see me this close again. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was really exciting to be able to talk to Michelle Rempel Garner. If you learned anything or just, I don't know, I really want to hear what you thought of this episode. Please, please, please send me an email. You can reach me at noor@canadaland.com. I really do read what you send me, and I am particularly interested in what y'all think about this episode and about what Michelle Rempel Garner had to say. If you like this episode, please leave us a like, a comment. You can subscribe to Canada Land. You can also hit the bell if you want to be notified when we publish. And if you want to support this network or you want to support this show, you can go to canadaland.com/join. Thank you, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Alrighty.